A roar of laughter echoed through the crowded auction hall as the old wooden crate crashed onto the bidding platform. Its sides were scarred, rusted nails sealed every edge, and faded shipping markings had almost disappeared beneath decades of dust. Someone joked that it wasn't worth the wood it was built from. Another called it expensive firewood. When the auctioneer finally shouted, $25, the room burst into louder laughter as one quiet stranger calmly lifted his bidder's card. Nobody knew that before the sun set that same day, the contents hidden inside that forgotten crate would leave experienced collectors speechless, rewrite one man's broken life, and remind everyone that the greatest treasures are often buried beneath years of neglect. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who could use a little encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community. Graham Mercer had never looked like someone chasing miracles. At 58, his weathered face carried the marks of countless construction jobs, failed business ventures, and years spent caring for a wife whose long illness had quietly emptied both their savings and their dreams. Since her passing 3 years earlier, Graham had learned to survive on routine instead of hope. Every Saturday morning he visited estate sales, flea markets, and small-town auctions, not because he expected to become rich, but because repairing old furniture gave him peace. Every cracked table and broken cabinet reminded him that damaged things could still become beautiful again. The annual county surplus auction had drawn collectors from neighboring states. Antique dealers filled the front rows while wealthy investors whispered about rare paintings and vintage automobiles listed in the catalog. Graham had only $63 folded inside his worn leather wallet. He had promised himself not to spend more than half of it. The valuable items disappeared quickly. A grandfather clock sold for thousands. An antique rifle sparked a bidding war. Elegant silver collections brought applause after every final bid. Graham simply watched, occasionally smiling as professionals celebrated another profitable purchase. Near the end of the auction, workers struggled to wheel an old nailed-shut crate onto the stage. It looked completely out of place beside the polished antiques. Layers of dirt covered every surface. One corner appeared burned. A faded paper label had become impossible to read. The auctioneer admitted that nobody knew exactly where it had come from. It had been discovered in the back of a storage building scheduled for demolition. Because no inventory existed, it would be sold exactly as found. The audience immediately lost interest. People began checking their phones. Several collectors quietly walked toward the exit. The auctioneer opened the bidding at $100. Silence. He dropped it to $75. Nothing. $50. Not a single paddle moved. Finally he sighed and called out $25. Graham stared at the crate longer than anyone else had. He wasn't imagining gold or priceless antiques. Something about the careful craftsmanship of the wood itself caught his attention. Whoever had built it had used thick oak reinforced with hand-forged iron brackets. Even empty, the crate alone was worth restoring. He slowly raised his bidder's card. The laughter began immediately. Someone shouted that he had just purchased $30 worth of termites. Another joked that he should have saved the money for lunch. Even the auctioneer smiled sympathetically before bringing down the hammer. Sold. $25. As workers loaded the crate into Graham's aging pickup truck, several people shook their heads, convinced they had witnessed the worst purchase of the afternoon. Graham thanked the employees, secured the heavy crate with worn straps, and drove away beneath the bright afternoon sun without looking back. He reached the small workshop behind his modest farmhouse just after midday. Sunlight poured through dusty windows, filling the room with golden beams that danced across shelves lined with repaired chairs, restored cabinets, and polished wooden clocks. Every project surrounding him represented patience instead of perfection. The crate sat silently in the center of the workshop. For nearly an hour Graham simply studied it. The nails weren't random. They had been driven carefully into every seam with unusual precision. Whoever sealed the crate had intended to keep moisture out rather than prevent theft. That realization puzzled him. Using an old pry bar, he slowly removed each nail one at a time. The wood creaked. The lid resisted. His heartbeat grew louder. Finally the heavy top lifted. Inside wasn't gold. There weren't stacks of cash. No glittering jewels waited beneath layers of cloth. Instead, Graham discovered dozens of tightly wrapped oil paintings, leather journals, rolled architectural drawings, and several carved wooden boxes packed with handwritten letters protected by waxed fabric. Everything had been carefully preserved. At first he thought they were reproductions. Then he noticed the signatures. He recognized only one. Years earlier his wife had admired the work of a forgotten regional landscape painter whose original paintings had almost disappeared after a devastating warehouse fire decades ago. One signature matched perfectly. Graham carefully unwrapped another painting. Then another. His hands began trembling. Each canvas carried extraordinary detail, untouched colors, and dates stretching back nearly 80 years. More surprising than the artwork were the journals. The first pages revealed that the crate had belonged to a husband and wife who had spent their lives documenting disappearing rural communities across North America. Rather than seeking fame, they traveled from town to town painting schools, churches, family farms, and ordinary people whose stories would otherwise vanish forever. Their work had never reached museums because they died unexpectedly while relocating their collection. Their only surviving relative had unknowingly abandoned the storage unit generations later. Graham wasn't looking at hidden riches. He was looking at forgotten history. Unsure what to do next, Graham carefully photographed several paintings and contacted the County Historical Museum before the afternoon ended. The curator nearly dismissed his message until she saw the photographs. Within 2 hours, she personally drove to Graham's workshop. Her expression changed the moment she stepped inside. She slowly removed her gloves after examining the first painting, unable to hide the tears forming in her eyes. For years historians believed almost the entire collection had been destroyed. Researchers had searched across 3 countries without success. Yet here it was, preserved inside a forgotten crate that everyone had laughed at only hours earlier. Word spread quickly. Experts arrived before late afternoon. Each examination confirmed the same astonishing truth. The collection represented one of the most important rediscoveries in regional cultural history. Its financial value reached well into the millions. News reporters gathered outside Graham's property before sunset, eager to interview the man who had turned $25 into an unimaginable fortune. But Graham surprised everyone again. He announced that although he legally owned the collection, he couldn't imagine locking it away in a private vault. The artists had spent their lives preserving ordinary people's stories. Their greatest wish had been for future generations to remember forgotten communities. Selling everything to the highest bidder would betray that purpose. Instead, Graham worked alongside museum officials to establish a permanent public exhibition. A generous agreement ensured the museum could preserve the collection while providing Graham with enough compensation to secure his future without sacrificing the legacy hidden inside the crate. The announcement spread even faster than the discovery itself. People who had laughed at the auction returned, not because they wanted to apologize for mocking his purchase, but because they genuinely admired the kindness behind his decision. One of the loudest critics was a wealthy antiques dealer named Preston Hale. He had been the first to laugh when Graham placed the winning bid. Embarrassed by his behavior, Preston visited the museum during the exhibition's preparation. Standing quietly before the restored paintings, he admitted that he had spent decades chasing profits while forgetting that history carried value far beyond money. The 2 men spoke for hours. By the time Preston left, he had pledged financial support for restoring additional forgotten collections stored throughout the county. Graham never reminded him about the laughter. Forgiveness came easier than resentment. Months passed. Visitors traveled from across the country to see the remarkable exhibition. Families found paintings depicting towns their grandparents once described. Elderly visitors recognized churches that no longer existed. Children listened as volunteers shared stories inspired by the recovered journals. The collection became more than artwork. It became a bridge connecting generations. Graham continued restoring furniture in his little workshop. He purchased a newer truck, repaired his farmhouse roof, and established a scholarship honoring his late wife, who had always believed that beauty deserved to be shared instead of hidden. He refused extravagant interviews. Whenever journalists asked how it felt becoming wealthy overnight, Graham always redirected attention toward the artists whose life's work had almost been forgotten forever. His greatest satisfaction never came from the money. It came from knowing that something everyone dismissed as worthless had become a source of hope for thousands. One sunny afternoon nearly a year later, Graham returned to the same county auction. This time people recognized him immediately. Instead of laughing, they greeted him warmly. Some asked for photographs. Others simply thanked him. As another neglected piece of furniture rolled onto the stage, several bidders hesitated before dismissing it. The room grew unexpectedly quiet. No one wanted to repeat the mistake they had made before. But Graham smiled gently because he understood something far more important than hidden treasures. Most forgotten objects never contained millions of dollars. Most overlooked people never became famous. Yet both deserved to be treated with dignity before anyone knew their true worth. That lesson couldn't be measured by any auction price. Before we reach the end of this journey, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or discovered something valuable where others saw only disappointment? Leave a meaningful comment below and share the lesson this story reminded you of. As Graham locked his workshop for another peaceful evening, the sunlight stretched across the old wooden floor where the empty crate still rested against the wall. He had kept it as a reminder that appearances often tell the smallest part of a story. Every scar on its weathered boards represented years of being ignored, judged, and forgotten, yet inside it had quietly protected a priceless legacy until the right person came along. Graham realized that people are often much the same. Hearts can be bruised, dreams can be buried, and lives can appear ordinary from the outside, but kindness has a remarkable way of uncovering hidden value that the world overlooks. The greatest treasure he found that day was never the fortune or the fame. It was the renewed belief that hope still exists for forgotten things, broken lives can begin again, and one humble act of faith can transform not only a single future but the lives of countless others. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Thank you for being part of our community, and may you always remember that the world's greatest treasures are often hidden where no one else thinks to look.